Question number 1, where do I research? So there's actually 5 primary sources that you can use to find some information. The first one's going to be your own knowledge and experience. The second one is going to be library resources. Third, the internet. 4, conducting interviews. And 5 is conducting surveys. So let's go ahead and talk about number 1, tapping into your own knowledge and experience. This is actually one of our most neglected resources that we have. More often than not, we're given a topic and we'll go ahead, hop online and try and find some information, instead of sitting back and asking ourselves questions. So let's say you and your group are given the topic of unemployment. You might want to hop online and try and find some information, but instead of doing that, try this. Ask yourself, do I have, or anyone I know have, experience with unemployment? What was the experience like? And what resources were being used? So that's really a good way to start your research, because you are your own best resource. So the second one is the library. Library is really great in the sense that there are a multitude of resources for you to use to really research your topic. With that said, in the book, it refers to card catalog indexes, and given that this book was written in like 2012, 2013, there have been some changes. So pretty much now you can hop on to the online library or go in person and find all the information you really need. There's also periodicals, which are really helpful. This consists of journals, magazines, newspapers, which are really going to be helpful because it's going to provide you with the most updated information, unlike library books, which could have some years published on them. So like I said before, library is a great tool, and in terms of the library, whether it's online or in person, if you have questions, never be afraid to ask. So your next resource is the internet. One of our most obvious and typically many of our first resources is the internet. The internet is a collective knowledge from a multitude of organizations, groups, and individuals. So with the information on the internet, you always have to remember 2 things. 1 is a lot of the information that we're given lacks authority. There's constantly outdated information. So for example, you could be looking up symptoms of a headache, stomach ache, and you might hop online and go on WebMD and find that you apparently have cancer. So really sit back and think about the information that you're being given. Number 2, some of these resources aren't available. So per se, scholarly journals and books might not be available directly online, but like I said before, they will be available on things like the library, whether online or in person. So there are some things to consider when you're accessing this type of information online. So is the information you're receiving from a qualified expert? What are the credentials of the group, the individual, or the agency? Is your information accurate? So you don't want to just research from one internet resource. You want to go on multiple. You rather go on multiple and find the same thing than just go on one and get the information completely wrong. Next one is information current? And you can do that by trying to find a publishing date on the website. If there's not, then you might want to consider the fact that it might be a bit old. The next one is the information objective? Is the information purely based on fact, or are there personal biases and opinions that are clearly shown? So it's extremely important to keep these questions in mind when you're researching information online. So like I had said, questions you want to ask: is it reliable? Is it objective? And is it current? So you owe it to your group and yourself to have some reliable information. You don't want to share any false information with your group members and or your audience. So the next one is conducting interviews. So a lot of people are a bit reluctant in the terms of conducting interviews, but I promise there's so much more than just valuable information from conducting an interview. You can make some connections, whether personal or professional. So the first step of conducting an interview is figuring out, well, who am I going to interview? This obviously will be somebody that has some sort of relation to your topic. For example, if you're talking about lack of funding in public schools, you might want to talk to a local principal or teacher that is being directly affected by funding. The next thing you want to do is, after you figure out who you're going to interview, is asking them to interview. So what you want to do, whether via email, formal letter, you want to keep it really brief and friendly. You want to ask them for about 15 minutes of their time and let them know that you will do it based on their convenience and not yours. But if you're unable to conduct an interview with this particular person, go ahead and move on to your next candidate. Third step is making a list of questions, and this is after you do your own research. So obviously you want to do your own research and understand the topic that you're talking about, because you want to have more specific and articulate questions during your interview. The next one is obviously the interview itself. And so be sure to be punctual, dress appropriately, and stick with your permitted time frame. At the end, thank your interviewee. After the interview, you might want to send a card or a brief letter thanking them for their time. The last one I have is taking surveys. So a great resource is surveying. It can really help you gather information on the seriousness and the nature of the problem, generate some potential solutions, and make a list of ideas of support or opposition based on your topic. So if you're surveying, be sure to keep the following in mind. Number one is develop a clear goal in your purpose of your survey. So what are you trying to achieve? Number two, select a large enough group that will represent the population. Number three is decide how you want to interview people. Is it phone, email, or face-to-face? 4 is construct a questionnaire that is clear and concise on the questions that you are trying to ask. Number 5 is test the clarity of your survey by maybe making a mini survey after your actual survey. So for the most part, a survey doesn't really need to be too elaborate or statistically perfect, but if you're conducting a much more complex survey, you should probably consider looking on survey methods through a book or online, or asking somebody that has a bit more experience. So for question 1, like I said, where do I research? Your first one is personal experience and knowledge. Second one is going to be library resources. Third, internet. The fourth one, conducting interviews. And the fifth one is conducting surveys. So those are your 5 primary resources for question number 1 of where do I research?